It's the week ending Friday the 19th of September, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen a historic second state visit to the UK for President Trump, US comedian Jimmy Kimmel being taken off air after comments about Charlie Kirk, and the death of Hollywood royalty Robert Redford at the age of 89. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And Avengers Assemble, the whole team is here. From the Week's digital team, it's Jamie Timson and Harriet Marsden, and we have senior editor of the Week Junior, Felicity Capon. Guys, Ed Davey turned down his invitation to the state banquet this week. I'm sure yours just went missing in the post, but if you were invited to Windsor Castle, would you go?
Yes, hell yes. I don't want to talk to anyone.
Would you rather go to the state banquet, Felicity, or would you rather go kayaking with Ed Davey?
It's a no-brainer. The state banquet every time.
Wow.
Oh, it's Sophie's choice.
Yeah. I would go, but just refuse to shake Trump's hand. But then he'd probably like that because, you know, he's OCD about that. Felicity, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is Nepal heading for democracy or discord?
Sanjay got hit in 4 places. These are the rubber bullets that struck him.
I was hit suddenly. The bleeding was unstoppable. I was not able to stand on my feet. 2 friends held me up and put me in an ambulance. I was wearing a t-shirt and trousers, and they were soaked.
How do you feel towards the police?
If the police were more rational, this situation would not have happened.
Nepalese protester Sanjay speaking to Sky News' Cordelia Lynch on Friday. Felicity, what's been going on this week?
So Nepal has elected its first ever female Prime Minister, Sushila Karki, and this week she is putting together her cabinet. Her appointment to the top job follows weeks of unrest, huge protests across the country, mainly triggered by young people. The protests resulted in Nepal's parliament being set on fire, the former Prime Minister quitting and fleeing the country. 72 people have been killed in the protests, and within 2 days, everything was torn down. And then out of all this chaos, they've got the first ever female prime minister. But the way that she was elected really caught my eye because it was done via the gaming platform called Discord. So it's the first time a head of state has been elected via social media, basically.
Which is remarkable, and we will definitely get to that bit of the story. But just first to fill in the blanks for people who missed it, because as you say, it is kind of a big story, obviously, if you're from that part of the world. Actually, you know, the British news media for the last 2 weeks has been all Angela Rayner and Peter Mandelson, hasn't it? And I missed this completely. So, Jamie, can you summarise for us what actually happened in Nepal to cause this uprising in the first place?
Yeah, of course. So Nepal's been in crisis actually for months. Anger has been building towards the Prime Minister, KP Sharma Oli. He faced allegations of corruption, patronage. Critics accused him of failing to address mounting economic problems. It kind of exploded when the kind of protesters needed somewhere to focus their ire, I guess. Protests erupted, led by students, young people. I think the really shocking thing was how harsh the security forces cracked down on it. As Felicity was saying, more than 70 people died. It was the bloodiest unrest since Nepal's civil war ended in 2006. Olly was then forced to resign. Parliament was dissolved. Elections were announced for March 2026, basically leaving the country in a kind of political vacuum. The students that were involved, or young people that were involved in the protest, didn't really trust the kind of traditional parties, and kind of very many kind of young Nepalese felt that they didn't really have anyone to turn to, which is how we ended up with this movement. It's called Hami Nepal, which is called as We Are Nepal in Nepalese. It's a youth-led protest group that had over 160,000 members, and they created a Discord server called Youth Against Corruption, where thousands gathered in real time.
And the thing they were particularly angry about, Harriet, was the banning of social media, or the attempt by the former Prime Minister Olly to ban social media. And that happened because of basically a hashtag that had been going viral. Just tell us about that, and then we'll get onto the Discord thing.
Yeah, so it's fascinating, actually, because social media kind of started this in the first place. So what happened was this Nepo Kid campaign took off on social media, which was basically highlighting the incredibly lavish lifestyles of the politicians' children. And the overarching theme of this was anger at the corruption and wealth inequality in such an unbelievably poor nation. All they could see was the kids of these politicians kind of living the life. So because of that Nepo Kid campaign, that was, many people said, was the main trigger for the government trying to ban all of these social media platforms. And for the very frustrated, mostly young, incredibly engaged activist population, they said that that was just the last straw. And that's when these widespread protests just erupted. And it was like the catalyst for all the anger about the corruption and about the inequality and the poverty, cost of living, and also like what most people say is the failure of this Nepalese republic, because the monarchy was abolished in 2008. And since then, there's been 14 governments representing 3 parties that have taken turns at governing. So basically, the accusation is it's not working.
And those videos, Felicity, that had gone viral, obviously not all of them are in English and that easy to find when you're over here, but I managed to see a prominent example, which was basically a lot of these so-called Nepo kids, you know, kids of politicians, and they'd literally identified the handbag that the women were carrying or the sunglasses that the men were wearing and then priced them up. So you could see in a very fast-paced slideshow, you know, $100,000 of luxury spending going past your eyes, and then cut quickly to people living on the streets in Nepal, eating with their hands and all the rest of it. And, you know, even from this distance, it made me angry. It was an effective bit of propaganda, that.
Yeah, absolutely. Nepal is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's deeply impoverished. So to see these images of the children of the ruling elites, you know, really living it up with designer handbags and yachts and, like, you know, just the most glamorous, luxurious lifestyles you can imagine, in sharp contrast to how the majority of Nepalese live, was just a recipe for disaster, basically. The country also has a very, very young population. So the median age is 25. The largest age group is 15 to 19-year-olds, and more than half the population are under 30. So they're more likely to be online. They're more likely to see these images. And it's sort of something that you're seeing across the world globally, is young people furious with the growing inequality that is really everywhere. You're having more and more billionaires are getting wealthier every year. Poor people are getting poorer. And it's interesting, there have been some comment pieces suggesting that this is indicative of revolution in the wider region. So there's, I mean, for slightly different reasons, it's not all completely the same, but there's been unrest in Sri Lanka, unrest in Bangladesh, recent mass student-led protests in Indonesia. Apparently Philippines are now looking at what's happening in Nepal, and young people again are kind of mobilizing and saying this kind of inequality is just not acceptable, and we're going to do something about it. I think a lot of them, well, some of them I think regretted how far these protests went. I don't think they intended for the Parliament building to have been burnt down, and obviously not for people have been killed. I think lots of people wanted it to be peaceful, but such is the outrage that it clearly got, you know, out of control.
So there was demonstration on the street, and to quell it, a group coalesced around Discord. How did that even happen? How did Discord become the thing that was the platform they were all talking on? Was it because the other ones were banned at this point?
I think the thing about Discord is that it's a very young, and as Felicity was saying earlier, it's kind of it was initially aimed at gamers. So it's actually something that's kind of out with the political establishment. Certainly not something that people are using on a daily basis in the same way that maybe WhatsApp or X or Instagram is being used. It's being used by a certain group, but it has become much more popular among young people. And certainly I know lots of young people who would use Discord every day, and not necessarily just for gaming. It was kind of one that was kind of seen as being outside of the establishment.
It sort of evolved into like a Reddit forum on your phone, hasn't it, basically?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the time people set up Discords for their own interests. So you'll have like it could be anything specific to, you know, whatever you're interested in.
I love Jamie
your
Timson.
Chickens. Yes, I'm sure there's a Discord where my mum just talks about how much she loves me and what a clever boy I am.
I was thinking more of fans of your work, Jamie, but maybe that is your mum.
Of course she's a fan of my work. What was interesting about it when it was on Discord is quite how supporters will say it's quite egalitarian, but basically people nominated candidates, they grilled them on their integrity and their vision and argued about the kind of political future for Nepal. It was so popular that Discord servers crashed, and then these discussions and debates and everything were mirrored on YouTube so that even thousands more people could do it. Eventually, 5 candidates were shortlisted. I think the key thing was that they weren't part of the establishment. They weren't, political insiders. They were activists, independents, reformers. And a kind of consensus emerged around the Prime Minister now, which is Sushila Karki. Her record was kind of credibility, effectively. She was Chief Justice. She prosecuted corrupt ministers, which I think was a big part of it.
But they're still part of the establishment then. I mean, she may have prosecuted the establishment, but she was still in it.
I think she was seen as someone who stood up to the interest. I think probably the argument of whether or not she's too closely tied to the political establishment will come out depending on how she does, right? But it was effectively a Discord poll that chose in which she was chosen, which is an incredible thing.
I mean, it's absolutely staggering, isn't it, Harriet? You could not have predicted that would be a way that someone would gain, albeit interim power, albeit with a lot of, balls up in the air and no one quite sure what's going to happen next. Nonetheless, it's not just a poll to see what people think and then there's some other process. She won on Discord and then she became Prime Minister.
Yeah, so this is where I think that this is such a fascinating story. So social media and Discord actually has been used really successfully to kind of coordinate action and coordinate protests and turn people out to protests. But this is, I think, very unprecedented in the scale of actually being involved in creating a political future. But we're talking about 150,000 people meeting in a virtual chat room to discuss the future of the country. And this was so intense, and all the polls that allowed participants to nominate their interim leader in real time, and all the discussions, and eventually they coalesced around Sushila Karki. But then the thing that I found so interesting was that the army chiefs, the military that had imposed the curfew that actually originally drove people to Discord, they met with the organisers of this channel and asked them to suggest a nominee for interim leader. So this was with the help and the involvement of the military. So the very social media that the government originally tried to ban, and then the curfew enacted by the military that pushed people to social media, has now been used to help the government and the military select the interim leader. And I think that is fairly unprecedented.
I think that's really key. I think the point that the group on Discord and the protesters still relied on the army and getting the army on side to basically agree that they would allow Sushila Karki to be in power for the next 6 months is still quite a big deal. And the only other thing I would say is that even though it is remarkable and extraordinary, and all the signs at the moment are looking that this is a positive thing, you're seeing with Karki's new appointments lots of human rights and anti-corruption campaigners. It does all look kind of like it's going in the right direction. But there are some people who are saying that actually, is this unconstitutional? It has happened extremely quickly. It was very disorganized, a random social media call, according to some people. I imagine there are quite a lot of Nepalese who aren't online, who had nothing to do, who weren't involved in this discussion at all. So was it representative of the whole country? Also, the March date for the next elections, the Nepal's major political parties did not agree to that. They weren't part of the conversations. Some were hunted down and attacked by mobs and were stuck in army barracks at the time that this was being organised. The rejoinder to that is, well, nearly every office needed to run the government basically went up in smoke. So in terms of getting anything off the ground, would have been a big deal. But I think you also have to, there's just something that's, it could all go wrong, basically. And I'm trying to be cautious. And just because they're young people, I think it's very tempting to be the rebellion, young people. But look at the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Young people do not always get it right. Things can go horribly wrong. So, an element of caution might need to be introduced into this.
I think the fact that Discord wasn't set up for this reason, right? It isn't like an online platform destined to create political, to choose political leaders or whatever is an issue. And as much as, people can say that Discord is, in some ways, it's kind of, it's semi-gated. You decide who joins the groups. You have some control over it. You don't actually know who's involved on these servers. You don't know. They're very obviously vulnerable to manipulation and disinformation.
Also, you need IT, right? I mean, there's two-step verification. You need a fluency to be able to use it. That's not democracy, is it? You're alienating people who can't get on it.
People could argue that it's more egalitarian than access to like a physical polling station that people can't reach. You know, there's more people that have access to the internet that may not have access to like physically getting to polling stations. But I think the really crucial thing here is that Discord was not used to select a new leader. It was used to suggest a candidate for interim leader that was then chosen by the military. And we're not talking that this has elected a new leader. This is, if Discord hadn't been used in this way, then as far as I can understand it, the interim leader would have been chosen without any involvement of the people. So we're not saying that this is in place of a democratic election. We're not saying that this is in place of ballots. This is simply the army asked them to suggest a candidate for interim leader, which was much more, if you could argue that's much more democratic and egalitarian than the army just selecting one themselves.
One could. But I mean, people have been left out of this democratic process, is the point, Harriet?
Yeah, but it's not a democratic process. It's not an election. Like, I think that's a really crucial point. It was just a suggestion for an interim leader that wouldn't normally have involved anyone. So you could argue that the involvement of 150 to 200,000 people is significantly better than the involvement of a few politicians and army chiefs.
What it reminds me of, Felicity, is the Arab Spring. I used to do a slot on 5 Live on a Saturday night, kind of ridiculous as it seems now, kind of looking back on the week's internet news, like that was the thing you could do in 15 minutes. But it was very much in that era, 2011, 2012, and lots of this stuff was happening then, and people were predicting that this is how regimes would fall, you know, across the world, across Africa in particular, and the Middle East. This is how regimes would fall. Young people would rise up and say, no, I don't want to be treated like this, and they do it all on Twitter as it was then. Does it remind you of that as well? And if it does that mean that there was just a pause of 10 years in between where things didn't pan out like that? Or is this just sort of brief resurgence of that kind of activity and, you know, conventional means of influencing the populace will return?
It made me think of the Arab Spring too. And I sort of remember at the time there was a big enthusiasm for social media and how it was going to upend everything for the good. And obviously that was the image that the social media companies themselves wanted to promote. But actually having some distance now from the Arab Spring, I think there was a bit of whitewashing going on, and I don't think the role of the social media companies was as benign as maybe they were trying to make it look. I mean, I think there was certainly, you could see that countries which had far less access to the internet and social media also had protests, such as Lebanon and Syria. They were erupted, and they didn't have a massive amount of population online. And there was a very good piece in the New Yorker by Malcolm Gladwell from ages ago, who also kind of poured cold water on it and was talking about, you know, the civil rights protests in the 60s, which hadn't relied on social media at all. And also when you look more recently at Facebook's role in Myanmar and other countries where Facebook itself has admitted that its systems promoted violence and hatred, I think there's a sort of exaggerated enthusiasm for the role social media can play. And as you were saying, Ollie, when you look at the Arab Spring, lots of countries turned more authoritarian and there was more of a crackdown. So social media definitely played a role in mobilizing people and getting people to talk. But I think it's got a more murky legacy, perhaps, than it looked at the time.
Nonetheless, though, I guess internationally, Harriet, you know, neighbours of Nepal are going to be looking at this and thinking, are we about to see a Discord winter? Is this going to spread?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Discord has already been used by political activists in Hong Kong, for example. Also in the US, it's actually been more associated with the propagation of far-right and extremist content. Yes, I do think that countries will be looking at this very, very carefully, because it doesn't matter whether or not you think that the Arab Spring was a good thing or successful. It doesn't matter whether you think that social media was kind of beneficial. The reality of it was that it was incredibly powerful. It was used to kind of bypass state-controlled media. in countries with like significant media repression, it did allow people to coordinate in that way and broadcast videos and images and eyewitness accounts directly from street protests that then brought like global awareness to uprising. Whether or not it's a good thing, I think, is irrelevant to the crucial point, which is that social media is a powerful tool for organization, whether for good or for bad.
Okay. On the way, the origin of life itself, no less. That's after this. Okay, Jamie, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
It's life, Jim, but not as we know it.
So it's entirely possible that microbial life has already travelled to somewhere like Mars. Conditions there were remarkably similar to Earth 3.8 billion years ago. Could these extremophile microbes have already colonised the underground aquifers of Mars? If they're already there, have they adapted to their new environment? Or maybe life on Earth actually originated on Mars and then travelled over to our planet. They may not be little green aliens or intelligent life as we understand it, but the very possibility that life could have transferred across the solar system and beyond is deeply intriguing.
Amazing microbes. The unmistakable voice of Professor Brian Cox there. The video Are We Thinking About Alien Life All Wrong is available on BBC Ideas. Jamie, what is the big idea here?
Was it Brian Cox or was it Alan Bennett?
In my impression, they're the same, with a flash of John Ronson. She didn't say anything.
Before we start, I will say that I am a history graduate that then became a journalist, and I have done zero science for, I don't know, 25 years? No,
Bodes well.
More,
yeah.
15 years. But NASA this week have announced evidence of life on Mars with what they're calling a high degree of confidence. NASA isn't claiming that we've found Martian microbes crawling around in the dust. What they have found are mineral textures and chemical signatures inside a Martian mudstone that looks remarkably similar to patterns left by microbes here on Earth. Minerals like vivianite and gregite, which sounds like factions in the Labour Party, doesn't it? Arranged in bullseye patterns hint at ancient chemical cycles that could have been driven by microbial activity billions of yeyears ago.
Okay.
It is apparently the strongest potential biosignature yet, but NASA stresses the word potential, which is probably why we bring it to an underreported podcast, because I guess if they had actually found life, it might be front and centre on the old BBC homepage.
But this appeals to you, old conspiracy theory JT, because it plays into the concept of panspermia. Tell me about that.
Yes, absolutely. This isn't a late night podcast, Ollie. You can say it properly. Panspermia. The idea is simple but profound. Maybe life didn't start on Earth at all, but maybe the seeds of life came from somewhere else, Mars in this instance. Hitchhiking on comets or asteroids. Recent studies of space rocks brought back by NASA's NASA mission and a Japanese mission found that asteroids contained amino acids, basically the building blocks of DNA and RNA. And the theory goes that if these ingredients rained down on early Earth, they could have jump-started biology here. So if you want a little bit of a history, I know you're always into the history of panspermia. It actually comes from the Greek philosopher Anaxagoras. He's probably going to be dead, so he won't mind me butchering his name. Writing in the 5th century BCE, which suggested that life, or at least its seeds, were spread throughout the cosmos. He coined the word panspermia, meaning seeds everywhere. Basically, since then, it's kind of it's popped up in and around science for a little bit, but it resurfaced in the 20th century during the space age, where astrobiologists like Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe argued that interstellar dust might actually contain microbes. And that is where we bring it back to the clip, which is Brian Cox talking about some of the things that we found on Earth, these things called extremophiles, which are microbes that can survive boiling heat, freezing cold radiation, and even the vacuum of space. Basically, they didn't exist before, or they did exist, but we didn't know about them. And the fact that then that kind of proves that microbes could survive, because that was always one of the things about panspermia. People were like, these microbes can't survive this trip, but actually they potentially could. We're here. It's possible that we've had life on Earth seeded from life from other places.
Okay.
Now, the other argument, Ollie, which I'm sure you're about to put across, is that maybe it's all bollocks.
Well, I was about to say not quite that, but maybe it's not surprising, Felicity. I mean, Jamie was saying that for a while this was kind of discredited theory and now it's being a bit more embraced. But actually just, again, very much not as a science graduate, but just now being aware of just how large the galaxy and the universe is. The fact that some rocks might have piggybacked from Mars to Earth doesn't seem like that big a distance. I mean, it's a bit, it's the same as going from a satellite to Earth or from the moon to Earth. It's right next to us in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, kind of. I think so. I approached this story with quite a lot of cynicism, thinking that this was either scientists getting very excited and this was a lot of confirmation bias at play. It was like the dream find for scientists. Or it was journalists getting, all the headlines being like life on Mars. Or it was NASA scientists who want to get this story into the news because they need to secure funding for sample return, which is a major part of this. Getting it back from Mars and getting it in a lab to actually see what's going on is a big part of this. But then when I started to look into it, my cynicism sort of evaporated and my mind was literally kind of blown. It genuinely does... It is starting to look like there is a compelling case for life on Mars with this new rock that's been found. And the conclusions of that are kind of mad because it would kind of suggest that life is easy to get going. So if there's life on Mars, it would have been there at was on Mars 3.5 billion years ago. That would have been at the same time as Earth. So if life started on Earth and Mars independently, that is quite a big deal and suggests that life can just get going, which makes it more likely that it could have happened elsewhere in the solar system. And like you said, is not that much of a big deal. Or the other mind-blowing possibility is that we are Martians who turned up on this planet and started life here, but we actually came from Mars. So every which way you look at this, it's hard not to have your mind blown, I think.
There you are. What do you think, Harriet, of the idea we all came across on who needs the small boats? We've got small asteroids.
Yeah, there's this actually, there's kind of a sort of fringe theory called directed panspermia. So this is kind of this theory that aliens actually deliberately sent microbes or life forms to Earth to propel evolution. Which, obviously is not very credible. But I've actually been following this really closely over the past few years. I'm kind of into space. And I think that what has been passing under the radar over the past year in particular is this drip, drip, drip of information that is being released about what the NASA's Perseverance rover has been finding on Mars, because it landed there in 2021. So this is 4 years worth of information now. It's we've had news story after news story after news story over the past few years of credible evidence of past microbial life being found on Mars. It's passing under the radar, I think, because there is no way to actually prove it yet until we get the samples back from Mars, which is massively in the balance at the moment because Donald Trump's proposed cuts to NASA have basically cancelled the Mars sample return program, which was a joint program between NASA and the European Space Agency. But there is very, very credible indications of past microbial life on Mars. That is not to say that it is easy for life to begin. It's also not to say that just having the right conditions means that you'll necessarily create life. And it doesn't actually solve the bigger question, which is how did life begin? Where life began is interesting and compelling, but it is not the question that scientists are most hung up on.
Yeah, it's also maybe just not as sexy, Jamie, as, Man on the Moon. That's the thing, isn't it? In terms of appeal to the public and cut through, it seems like NASA, in a way, have been trying to beat that ever since 1969. And, it's interesting, isn't it, what Felicity mentioned? She said she sort of cynically thought this, then dismissed this. But a lot of people in the comments sections of some of the websites we've been looking at with regard to this story are saying, which is... NASA makes this case every decade. They say, there might be life on Mars, and they say it just at the very point that they need some more money to fund themselves, because it's the one thing they might hook people in with.
Yeah, I actually, as I was reading about this, there was the famous one was in 1996 when a NASA team said that it had found ancient microbial life within a 4 billion old Martian meteorite that had landed in Antarctica, including microscopic fossils, organic molecules, mineral structures. Basically, an international team then completely debunked it and said it wasn't clear, or it wasn't as clear as obvious as they make out. There was a Wall Street Journal article on this that was talking about false starts in the search for life on Mars. I think there's a part of me that doesn't really blame NASA. If any company or organization is looking to make more money, this kind of PR is going to be incredible for them. But they have developed a scale, the confidence of life detection scale, which is COLD, to guide announcements. And right now, the Perseverance rover's findings sit in the middle, which is compelling but not proof. I think probably in terms of like the future, it is, as Felicity says, all about sample return. Perseverance has cached those Martian cores, including the Mudstone. If they can get them back to Earth, then we can talk about, being able to do better studies on it. But there are also other missions going to Europa, Titan, kind of beyond Mars with the moons. They're basically moons, and they might have a better chance for active life than active life we're talking about, rather than millions of years ago. So I agree that it makes a lot of sense for them to keep banging the drum for life on Mars. But there's a part of me that feels quite like, God, this is so beyond. No, we've got so many problems on Earth at the moment that it's kind of so beyond the realms of why we're even bothering to think about it, that there could be life on the other. But there is a kind of mind-blowing element, like Felicity was saying, that was like, God, we could be so wrong about. We could be like before Galileo and the Earth is flat. We could be so wrong about how we think of the universe and how we think. And I think panspermia as an idea is a great example of that, of people being like, hang on a second, maybe they're right. Maybe we have been. Life has started elsewhere and then come to the Earth rather than the other way around.
I mean, you twice appealed to God there. I don't know if you were aware of it, and I do wonder about that being another factor. In the US in particular, I don't know which of you wants to take this up, but I just wonder whether it really will guarantee NASA more funding, talking about the origins of life, when, of course, sizable donors to Donald Trump think that God created the world for Adam and Eve.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump is also massively pushing the idea of sending human missions to Mars.
Yeah, but not to contravene the Bible.
I mean, yes, on the one hand, you've got the religious component that is evident in the US government, and we've got NASA's proposed funding cuts and why there might be a kind of vested interest in getting people more excited about this. But like everything else we talk about on this podcast, like every single other topic, it comes back to power, because China is also pursuing missions to retrieve samples from Mars in 2028, which would make it like the first country to bring potentially biologically active planetary stuff back from beyond Earth. India is also pursuing a similar mission. Like other countries are looking at similar programs, like Jamie was saying, to other moons. So this goes far beyond the US. And it's also like, no matter how much you can say, and I think it's a very legitimate argument, that there are much bigger problems on Earth that require much more money and funding and attention, and this seems so esoteric and so kind of luxury. It is also that it's part of the space race. It's part of a race for dominance with China, effectively.
I mean, Felicity, one group that is excited about all this stuff, of course, is your readers at The Week Junior. Do you detect that from your mailbag, that this is the kind of thing they get excited about? It's us adults saying, well, so what?
I actually don't think we have put this story in our magazine for next week, which I'm beginning to think was an omission. It was on the it was on the list of stories, but I wonder whether that initial cynicism of, every time there's a headline where it's like maybe or something like that, we think this is too speculative to give to our readers. But the more I looked into it, the more I got really excited, and it's definitely something. Our readers love space stories, and particularly when there's so much grim news going on here on Earth, we're always looking for something that's positive and exciting and groundbreaking. And I do understand the arguments of, we've got so much to deal with here on Earth, why are we bothering with things beyond our planet? But I disagree, just because I love stories that show human endeavour and just the fact that we can even do this, that we can even get a rover to Mars and even be looking into all this, just I think is absolutely wonderful, and I think our readers feel the same. So yeah, I might have to hastily go back to the drawing board and see if we can make this our cover story.
Well, there is a cold hard cash argument to this as well. Like, these countries' space agencies are not just pursuing the notion of life beyond Earth just like for funsies. They do believe that the answers to how life began could be really valuable and profitable in fields like robotics, like AI in particular, synthetic biology, chemistry. Like, they are seeing this as an investment that will have dividends down the line. It's not just a case of wonder and human endeavor. There is also that they are investing this much money in it because they believe that they will get more out of it.
Consider the gargantuan return on investment. That'll be the next Brian Cox documentary. All right, up next, a man from the Welsh Middle Ages is making the headlines this week. Find out why after this. Harriet, you are finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The real Prince of Wales.
This island has been home to many kingdoms. First, my people, the Cymry. Then came the Romans, the Vikings, the Angles and Saxons, the Flemish, the Normans. We spoke a dozen languages from a dozen nations. And then this hodgepodge of peoples became simply England. Now, only Saxon may be spoken at England's court, and the oldest tongue of this island is called foreign. Today, we teach the Saxon that this island was only ever theirs to share.
A trailer from the Welsh National Theatre released on Wednesday this week showing Michael Sheen as Owain Glyndwr from a very forthcoming production. It's coming out next September or something. But Harriet, what's the story?
Well, this week actually was Owain Glyndwr Day on Wednesday, so it's every 16th of September. And this is, he is said to be the last Welsh-born Prince of Wales, who in the 15th century led this 15-year rebellion against, the yoke of English oppression. So he's like a hero of Welsh nationalism. This week, the Welsh government is planning a new national park, and when it opened naming to the public voted for Glyndwr. So it would be Glyndwr National Park, but the organisation Natural Resources Wales warned in a report this week that name could lead to accusations of a pro-Welsh nationalist bias, because in recent years there's been this explosion of interest in him, and he's obviously very associated with the Welsh desire for independence. And because the campaign for independence has grown so much over the past decade and has actually gone into Welsh politics, they were saying that there would be a risk that naming the park after him would lead to accusations of pro-nationalist bias.
A risk. That's an interesting word, isn't it? I mean, if that's what the public want, what's the risk? Surely the risk is politically to say, no, you can't name it after the person you want to name it after because we don't want you to have a vote for independence.
Well, it's true that there are so many statues and monuments and things already named after him, including a national trail in Powys, and Wrexham University was originally named after him. But it comes in the context of this really intensifying pro-independence movement and this massive drop in support for Welsh Labour.
Felicity.
I feel like there's always a slight problem with asking the public to name things. This story instinctively made me think of Boaty McBoatface.
Yeah.
But yeah, it also it speaks to a kind of general renewed interest in national identity, and it slightly struck me as mad that they would ask the public for the name that they wanted. This popular name of this Welsh hero would be brought up, and then there would be all this consternation that you can't possibly have that name. It's a bit like, I mean, okay, I know it's different. I don't want to open this can of worms, but it's a bit like the English flag. You can't possibly be proud of your history or your national identity at all. Like, let's suppress that at all costs. So I found that a bit ridiculous, and I hope they go ahead with a name, which, as Harriet was saying, is already across the country anyway, on pubs and statues, and rightly so.
Well, this is the thing, Jamie, isn't it? Regardless of independence, there is a move generally towards nationalism. And, the Welsh are proud of him. What would the issue be?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bit of a kind of, the worry about the vote is that it's been, hijacked by Welsh nationalists for political intent. And then it's like, well, if that is the case, maybe the problem is asking the public in the first place, as Felicity said. There is also a question of, is the report, is the report just highlighting political risk? And actually, they're not saying you can't name the park after this. They're just saying like, oh, hang on a second, this is the context of it, right? Which again makes it kind of like a bit of a shrug your shoulders, like, right, okay, well, that's kind of what their duty is, okay? I think that obviously identity and heritage have had a massive resurgence. Politics is now increasingly focused on place, identity, culture, and people are looking for symbolic anchors from the past. So Glyndwr is a native prince, a rebel, leader of Welsh Parliament. It obviously is symbolic, right? So that whole context makes it a news story. But I think what's funny is that, like, it happened up here in Scotland with Scottish independence, is that in the past, everyone used to be very like happy to talk about William Wallace or to talk about, you know, Scottish figures of cultural power, you know, whoever it is. But then suddenly, ever since the independence referendum, it's like, oh, well, we can't talk about that because that might get them a bit uppity about it. But there is a kind of po-faced lack of kind of humour when talking about any of this kind of stuff that is very frustrating, because it's... you know, if people in Scotland want to feel or identify with someone like William Wallace, or a kind of jokey anti-English sentiment, which is genuinely my experience of being up here, is that a lot of the time it is jokey and anti-English sentiment. That is not for someone in Westminster or someone further south to be like, oh, hang on a second, like, this is all very hand-wringy. And I think it's the same with Wales. Like, actually, when you look at the polling, there isn't a massive push for independence, and also the question of like how it would happen, or even what a independent Wales would look like, is always a kind of secondary or third thing. But it seems like a lot of the time people in Wales that want to keep, or Welsh Labour, or the kind of status quo, want to keep the status quo, what they're actually really upset about is like people having a bit of passion and people having a bit of like enjoyment in politics.
Nonetheless, here we are talking about whether there is momentum towards Welsh independence. So let's do it for a few minutes. Harriet, is there momentum towards Welsh independence? It's something that I don't tend to think about, apart from once every 5 years when the leader of Plaid Cymru, for some reason, turns up in a UK-wide political debate.
Yeah, so that is the biggest story here, that the idea of Welsh independence has gone from like a fringe niche idea to actually very much being in the forefront of politics and political rhetoric. So like consistently over the last 5 years, only about 24% of Welsh people say that they support independence from the UK. But in April, there was this poll that for the first time, a majority of voters said that they would back Welsh independence if it allowed Wales to rejoin the EU. So that was a really big moment for the pro-independence movement, and it echoes similar surges in nationalism and pro-independence in Northern Ireland and Scotland since the EU referendum, because the feeling was that these countries were better off when they were in the EU, effectively.
I mean, they've changed their tune, though, haven't they? Because Wales voted to leave the EU. Like, the difference between Scotland and Northern Ireland is Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain, whereas Wales voted to leave.
Yeah, but the argument is that since the EU referendum, that there has been, basically from Westminster, there has been this repeated kind of overriding of Westminster, like, over Wales, and kind of this war of attrition on devolution, and also an argument that Wales is kind of financially underserved compared with Scotland. So the bigger picture here is also that pro-independence is very high among young people. There's also a political picture, which is that support for Welsh Labour, who have won every election in Wales for 100 years and have dominated the Senedd since its creation in 1999, is just cratering. Like this week, the latest voting intentions poll came out about the election in May and showed that Plaid Cymru and Reform were sort of neck and neck, and Labour was like a really distant third. So there is this massive, massive surge in Wales that goes alongside this reclamation of the Welsh language. Like there are 3 other Welsh national parks, Snowdonia, Pembrokeshire and the Brecon Beacons, and 2 have been renamed with their Welsh name in the past few years. So Brecon Beacons is now known as Banau Brycheiniog, which I'm really hoping that I'm pronouncing right.
That's a bit of a confused political picture, isn't it, Felicity? It does sort of echo, doesn't it, just general kind of need for change across the UK. Last year in our general election, anyone but the Tories, maybe people in Wales just feel anyone but Labour, but it's not coherent, you know, why they'd vote for different people. If you want independence because you want to rejoin the EU, why would you be voting for Nigel Farage's party when he's responsible for Brexit? It's not a straightforward narrative, that.
It's not straightforward. What is straightforward is that Wales is the poorest of all the UK nations. Its poverty rates have hovered at about 1 in 5 people for the last few decades, and the proportion of that group considered to be in very deep poverty has risen from 33% in the 90s to 47% in 2023. Its public services are worse than they are in England. Welsh children's reading, maths and science skills were the lowest ever in 2024, and NHS waiting lists are much longer than the rest of the UK. So it's clear that for whoever is to blame, there is a lot of poverty and discontent in Wales. But yeah, it's a very confused picture. There is a by-election in Caerphilly next month because the Labour MP there has died. And Plaid Cymru and Reform are well ahead in the polls, and I think that is indicative of what the Welsh elections will look like next year, that Labour will come in third, which will be a huge upset and a massive victory for Reform. I mean, it's already a massive victory that Reform are doing so well in Scotland and Wales, but losing the long-time Labour stronghold of Caerphilly would be another huge blow to Labour morale.
Yeah, but then there is an analogy with Scotland, isn't there, Jamie? You know, for the people that would be voting Plaid Cymru because they wouldn't want to vote Reform because Plaid Cymru is more in line with their values, which are basically Labour values, but they don't want to vote for Labour because of the record. It's a very similar situation to that we had with the SNP. You can see Plaid might say, oh, look, all these people want independence. They don't want independence. They're just left-wing and they don't want to vote for Reform. And that's what they feel they've got a choice between.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the time, I mean, independence wasn't really a kind of major issue in Scotland at the forefront. It was obviously talked about for a bit in the 70s, but it kind of was kind of accepted in the 80s and 90s that it wasn't a thing, particularly with the devolution solution that came in when New Labour came in. But once it did start talking about, and once SNP started, and once people got disillusioned with Labour, there are a huge amount of similarities. And then SNP, what they did was incredible message discipline, which is what Plaid Cymru are trying to do, which is constantly beat the drum of Wales is not fully realising its potential while inside the UK, which was exactly the SNP's point. And also, as Felicity pointed out, Wales is underserved in comparison to Scotland. I mean, we don't have to go into the boring Barnett formula. I had to do enough of that in government. But it is financially underserved in terms of how much money it gets from the government in relation to Scotland. And that's to do with a number of reasons, mainly the fact that Scotland is more rural, so it gets more subsidies from the government to do with like rural farming and issues like that. But I think there is a big parallel, and the more that Plaid Cymru, if they get in power, beat that drum and talk about independence, the higher that the polling will go up, because people don't know it or to think about it as a thing until they see it on TV, until they see people talking about it. So I really do think it could get a lot more say. But I also, to bring it back to the park, I have that thing of like, it maybe is just as simple as like the people in the local area want to call this park this thing. Like, let them. It's got local buy-in. It's got name recognition. It's like, it doesn't have to be this like massive big deal. It's just like, let the people in who want to use the park call the park what they want to call it.
Or let Ryan Reynolds buy it. And then maybe they'll just name it after the town, because the town will be more famous because of Disney+.
Maybe.
It's happened before. That's it for this week. My thanks to Jamie, Harriet and Felicity, and to you. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you found this podcast right now, including YouTube, where you can watch us as well nowadays. Hello, if you are. You can also, by the way, get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to Unwrap next week, bye-bye.